Welcome to this week's Concurrency's Tech Insights. We are starting with a conversation about Teams as a platform. We are really glad to be with you this week. Thank you for taking the time to be part of our series. We're looking forward to sharing interesting insights with you, and we're going to dig right into Teams as a platform. This week joining you are myself. I'm Nathan Lesnowski, Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and I'm joined by two awesome architects within Concurrency. The first is Damon Sanchez, who is a UX architect at Concurrency. Welcome, Damon.
Welcome, everybody. Nate, how are you?
I'm fantastic, doing good. And then we also have Anthony Escobedo, who is also a technical architect with Concurrency. Welcome, Anthony.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. All right, we'll be back to these two guys in a second. We're going to jump right into our topic. Today, we're going to be talking about Teams as a platform. We'll be covering a variety of different use cases surrounding Teams, focusing on work team productivity, smart restart use cases, scenarios in the last several weeks where companies have leveraged Teams in their smart restart, and then also automation use cases, spaces where Teams has been used to automate a common process inside of an organization and to make it better. Also, we're looking forward to you joining us 2 weeks out. We're going to be having a conversation about harnessing the power of the Power Platform. I'll be hosting that with our very awesome Steve Campbell, and we're going to be talking about Power BI, Power Platform, and how we can accelerate a company's usage of these technologies to make their company better. So join us then as well. So let's talk about Teams as a platform. What do we really mean by that? I was thinking about how Teams contrasts against the other platforms that are out in the market right now, especially ones that people commonly compare with Teams. When you think about the platforms that people are using in and around communication and collaboration, especially communication, they're comparing Teams on the basis of the video conferencing experience, the extent to which the voice calls look the way they want, the number of boxes that a video call can have, all of which are important and all of which are interesting things for us to be talking about and valuable things, especially as we're working from anywhere, not just from home. So when we think about Teams, we first think about those ideas of chat and meetings and calls. We think about it in that context because that's the initial way that we're having communication about something. But today's conversation is about how that communication, the chat, the meeting, the call, transitions into the rest of the collaboration surrounding work that we're intending to get done. The relationship between that meeting, that call, that chat, and producing outcomes from that conversation on an ongoing basis surrounding a group of people that intend to work together. So that's where we're going to talk about the ideas of collaboration, the files that you're using, the conversation that you're having surrounding a file, the ideas of infusing that with scorecards and views and task plans, the relationship of the conversation to a whiteboard that you had to the next steps, the relationship of that conversation into custom apps that might be part of it, such as plugging into a Git or an Azure DevOps repository, or an idea around a work plan that you might have built in a project management tool, or your sales forecasting environment, or your collaboration environment that's in a completely third-party platform that's being pulled in. This idea of what it means to communicate and collaborate and execute on the ideas that you have. The fourth aspect of this that I think is really important is the relationship between the communication and collaboration and the security that embodies what's important around these spaces that we're doing this collaboration in. The extent to which I can control the access to that information in varying degrees, or based on the health of the device that a person is using to enter into that environment. Am I letting the right people in? Do those people that I'm letting in have the right controls around their devices? Is their identity secure? And is the content they're accessing the content that they should have access to? All of those questions are aspects of a modern collaboration platform that relates to communication, and that relationship between all four of these things is, I think, what sets Teams so far apart from the other competitors. I don't see other platforms in the market that do these things together. I see platforms in the market that have communication, and another platform that does collaboration, and another platform that does security, and we're trying to cobble them all together to do something. What has really impressed me about teams and what we're going to talk about today is how all these things fit together. So we're going to share these experiences, Anthony, Damon, and I, and I'm going to start with a story about how work teams can be more productive with Teams and the Power Platform. And the example of a work team that I'm going to use is our executive team at Concurrency. When our executive team at Concurrency went to working from home or working from anywhere, we realized that the way in which we were communicating and collaborating needed to take a step up. And it needed to take a step up, not just for that work from home or work from anywhere scenario, but we needed to realize it needed to take a step up in general because we wanted to work better together. And in retrospect, with the tooling I'm about to show you, we find that our experience working together in an executive team has gotten stronger in the last 3 months than it has gotten weaker. It's gotten stronger because we've met more often, we've met in context of the things that are important to us, and we've had a place where the information that's centric to our productivity lives, that enables us to be able to bounce off ideas and content and plans that each are aware of. So the first thing I'll show you is our executive team, which is right here. And it relates, the first thing that's interesting is our executive team contains varying different types of monthly business review meetings that we go through each month. These are PowerPoint decks that we each month we're responsible for filling out for our monthly business review, and we meet as an executive team. That then is exposed and visible inside the context of that team. So that team contains the file that we're collaborating on inside the context of the meeting. That contains an ability to be able to open up that file and interact with that file inside the context of what the team has. So if I were to say, onboard a new executive team member, I add them to that team. They can immediately see the history of all of these monthly business reviews, what we talked about, when we talked about it, notes that were taken, context of it to the overall meeting, whiteboard sessions connected to it, and the iteration of the content from a financial and strategic objective standpoint. That then relates to whiteboards from those same meetings. In this case, we were talking about the Concurrency Tech Happy 30 Minutes. Here are the notes that we took. In this case, we were talking about what is a team leader? What does a leader look like inside of Concurrency? What does a tech leader look like? What are the elements of that tech leader? That's connected to the meeting notes. It's connected to the people that were there and the scheduling assistant, who showed up, who didn't show up. What's interesting about this too is I heard someone say the other day, one thing I miss about being in the office is the ability to collaborate on a whiteboard. You don't have to wait to come back to the office to collaborate on a whiteboard. This is a capability that exists in Teams with Whiteboard today. And it's something we've been using for the entire pandemic period, working with each other with our pens to start collaborating in one space. That can also be represented in a OneNote that exists inside the team. So in this case, we are talking about our go-to-market. What is most important? What's the number one thing? What's the number two thing? What's been interesting? What have people been moving on? What haven't they been moving on? Whiteboards simply add that creativity, that ability for us to talk about an idea without it becoming overly formalized. That plugs right in our same executive team. Our executive team has those files I showed you earlier. It has the OneNote experience I showed you right now. Bouncing off of this, you're moving also then into our work backlog. The things that are important to our executive team beyond our operations conversation are our work backlog, broken into services and brand and sales and people, things that are important to us that are assigned to different individuals to go and accomplish. This allows us as a team to be able to organize what's important. Realize that this experience is the same experience we're using for video and chat and communications, and all of it ends up relating to each other. This is also available in a mobile app. So we bring this forward, and for us as an executive team, now we can prioritize who owns it, when are they going to get it done. So for example, if I open this up, you can see this is a conversation about our Q2 webinar series. Here's the owner. Here are the people who are also component to that webinar series in QBRs. You can see we've done our road shows, our QBRs, our COVID webinar series just finished, as did the Smart Restart webinar series. Now we're moving into the tech series, which you guys are in right now. So we're talking about, as an executive team, what's important to us. It's assigned to an owner, but it's assigned to an owner inside the greater context of the team that we're working on. So rather than like, hey, where's this thing and where's that thing, where's this other thing over here, our team gives us the context to work together, and it allows that context to make it a place where we can see what each other's doing in a transparent way and work with each other to be able to drive outcomes. outcomes. And these outcomes are put in front of us on a monthly basis so we can drive our strategic objectives. You can also notice that things that are important to us inside of our executive team are represented in our Power BI vision. So our executive reporting for our work team is a Power BI report, but it's instead of like it being this report over here on the side that I have to like, where was that report and how do I get to it? And where's all the things that I'm trying to make decisions on? That's just pinned to the experience of the team. Now, what you're seeing here is the power of bringing many different components of this together. You have Teams, you have Office, you have Microsoft Planner, you have Whiteboard and OneNote, and you have Power BI, all representing capabilities of how an executive team is working together. That efficiency is driving outcome for our executive team as we look at lead conversion, what's working and what's not, which of our campaigns have worked, which campaigns have driven outcome within our customers, which sales rep is seeing the best outcomes or the best benefits driven in each different month. All of these things are really important decisions that we're trying to make as an executive team, understand what's working, what's not working, and positioning that in a place where we can make decisions on it as one team allows us to be very productive. So think about how, not all of us on this call are in an executive team, but you are part of teams. What are the capabilities that work for you? And how can you drive these same accelerators, being different apps or different power capabilities or reports or visibility inside the context of a team rather than driving it in a sort of separate way of engaging those capabilities? So let's talk to Damon and Anthony. I think they've got some interesting ideas on this too. So Damon's going to talk a little bit about how the UX team has used Teams to do a lot of the same things we talked about from an executive standpoint. And then also he's going to talk about it inside the context of the Smart Restart. So welcome, Damon. Let's go through it.
Hi, thanks, Nate. So I think, just to key off of everything that you just said, I think, what I heard was, you get to pin these things inside of Teams and it works really well in the Microsoft ecosystem. But, for the UX team, we're using what's in the Microsoft ecosystem. But while, this pandemic has been going on, one of the things that we realized is that, we're on multiple devices. So whether we're on mobile, you've tapped into that in the conversation, whether we're on a tablet, whether we're on our desktops, we have to tap into all of that within the Teams ecosystem. And so for the UX team, regardless of what you're using in this device landscape, we've sort of been able to use the Teams app during the pandemic and now during the Smart Restart to sort of tie it all together. So something that you'll see in these next couple slides is what we've tried to do is we've taken our SharePoint homepage that contains all of the really useful links that we get to for a third party. So we're using Google Analytics, or we're tapping into our how we're doing our learning management through Interaction Design Foundation. That link is right there. A UX team's homepage wouldn't be a thing if it didn't have a quote from Paul Rand. So we have that in there too. But what you're seeing is an activity feed on the right-hand side of who has finished what, or who has worked on something. So an example would be we have an agenda for a client, and one of the people on the UX team actually needs that agenda to go into a workshop with. Here it was just touched 40 minutes ago. You can see on the right-hand side, and then we've got our document view right in here. So what's interesting about this is actually the component of the Teams group from SharePoint pulled in, just to your point, pinned in Teams. Incredibly useful for collaboration. It's something that we really look to. Here's something else too. When we think about Smart Restart, we actually had a team member who joined our UX team in the middle of the pandemic. So talk about sort of growth in the middle of of a pandemic. But they needed to be able to see that smiling face of the team. Who are they working with? How do we get a chance to know who we're working with? So in this case, they get a chance to see the team they're working on, and they can hover over, just like you did in your example, hover over Andrew or Kiana or myself, and Rachel's able to see our profile and what our email address is, what our direct extension is, things like that. So again, really handy to use. When we go into that sort of who's who and being able to see and collaborate with people, here's the group chat for the team itself. So if we log into our Teams, we're here, and now we can sort of carry on a chat dialogue, and again, using the traditional means of Teams, as an instant messenger or something like that. But as you can see across the top, we've got posts, files. Something that's really indicative of the UX team or any design team is you have a lot of assets. And so, say we're working on we're working in a workshop, we come out of that workshop with the mock-ups or something like that. Well, one mock-up might have 50 images in it that we're using, and then it might have fonts and icons. And so here what you're seeing is just we're using Teams as a file repository. So all of this is in the cloud. We've got history, backups, all of that. And we've got everything going from 2015 to 2020. So when we talk about onboarding somebody, where is everything? Like, where are our files? And we're using Teams for that, right? And so here they get chatting with the team, they get a reinforcement of who their team is, and then here's everything that we worked on for 2020.
Awesome.
Yeah, excellent collaboration tool. And to your point, this is how you can use Teams, from a UX team or a design team.
So Damon, those are really good examples of just sort of blocking and tackling parts of Teams, right? Chat, file content, ability to collaborate, pinning another page into the Teams experience. Let's take it another step forward as Teams as a platform. In the Smart Restart, we've used Teams in conjunction with the Power Platform to do some really interesting things. Can you walk through some of those examples of custom apps that might exist inside of the Teams experience using Power Apps and so on?
Yeah, you bet. I think this also ties into earlier webinars that we did week 1, week 2, week 3, where we were showing, the ability to actually build outside of Teams, SPFX, Power Platforms, and then we're actually just building that inside of a Teams tab. Runs independently outside, but we're able to pin it in Teams. And so this is a virtual assistant that we were doing. And when you think about AI and bots, a lot of times there's this sort of big jump of like that sort of anthropological jump where we need to associate it with somebody. And so this is a way where, that first view, the chat bot is saying, hey, how's it going? Hi, Sally, welcome back. Let me know if you need anything, and I'll track it down. So just putting that pin, that AI with a face,
I think that's really important. We were talking about, the idea of some bots have really great experiences, some don't. And I think it's the extent to which they have a sense of empathy, or the bot itself doesn't have empathy, but it's conveying empathy on the part of the company or the person that is connected to it. And that's a really important part of building a successful bot. And you can see how that's in a component of this Teams experience, whereas everybody's working inside the Teams experience as a whole, part of this has been to engage the community of concurrency and other companies via a bot through that experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think, from, the language that I'm seeing is, there's virtual agents, there's human agents, and, a quote that we can kind of look back at is your employees are your most important asset. So I think, when you look at it, the virtual agent is just as important as an employee. It's working with these people, the same way. So it's just as important that, they have that human aspect to them as well.
Well, and you tie into something there, Anthony, that idea of it being a piece of whole, right? It's not existing on its own. It's tapping into the ecosystem of concurrency, of the larger, that sort of branding. And so here you're seeing the ability to customize just the icon of what the bot is, just ties into that just a little bit more. And again, you've got that sort of natural language processing being incorporated into the bot, and all of it sort of just works together.
Yeah, you can see that element where not only does it have a little bit of personality, but we're also trying to embed empathy, where it says, great question. We're trying to help it to not be a sterile experience, because especially in this context where it was a Smart Restart bot for returning to the office, we wanted people to feel a connection, that we cared about what that experience looked like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you think about it, right? Here's the natural language processing inside the bot itself. And then what we do is we can, because it's bringing a human element to the language, we can take that idea and kind of weave that human element into things that have nothing to do with the artificial intelligence, and put that into our print material in the break room, into our SharePoint intranet on the home page, and it all just sort of connects together. Hey, I recognize this sort of language, that sort of colloquial conversation of how they're speaking to me, and it just invites people back in.
Yeah, and I think it's like driving, you're able to drive the culture not only, with, through Teams and through, the different collateral that you're going to have around the office or other ways that way, but being able to kind of reproduce that in a very similar way where it is driving those pieces of culture that you want. So like here, we see great question, and we see those things that are going to come back there, with that. It's a category, and there's multiple questions that you can have inserted there, or answers, I suppose, where you're going to be able to then have it mix it up and really make that human element where it's not just spitting out the same question or answers. You can really kind of dive into those different answers that you're going to be able to give back to make it feel more human.
Yeah, huge point. Let's talk a little bit about there's this team planning app that we've got integrated into Teams.
Sure. I think that from the COVID-19 side of things, that's there's a huge element to that when it comes to the pandemic that we're in right now. But when we look back at how other things can integrate, it's the same way as this. So this is just an area of which that's important to us right now. And when we're doing that new normal and we're bringing employees back to work, you can see that this app being a part of Teams it's no longer these separate platforms that you have to navigate to. It's really bringing in that uniform experience.
Right. Well, and the uniform experience, I think, is, again, to tap into what you just said. You look at the branding and the illustrations in this, it's the same thing as the chatbot, right? Ties in again, right? And then that idea of using the same kind of language, even though this isn't being powered by AI, we're still using that same language, we're still using that same visuals, and it just ties it all together. Now, what's interesting too is a lot of times when you think of Teams development or you think of Teams itself, it's very fluent design. The language of it is Microsoft's rollout strategy for their UI. It's all very consistent. It's all very
Right.
user friendly. But a lot of times there's this sense of not being able to change the interface itself. It is what it is. And in this case, you're seeing a tool running outside of Teams, being pinned inside of it, and it doesn't break the interface.
It doesn't feel like it's something foreign, right? That's what I really love about these sort of work team relationships, or driving this almost as, I don't say the new intranet, because there's probably still a function of the intranet, but certainly it's bringing the content closer to where people are working. And that's very powerful.
Right.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at a screenshot like this, where you're able to see that it's very end user centric, it's not only end user centric when you're looking and working with that app. On the back end, it's doing just as much, or if not more, when you're looking at the stats of who's checked in and who's going to be in the office, you're able to see that on the back end, whether it's in a Power BI report or it's just a static list. You're going to be able to look at that and then make that data into actual information that's going to be useful.
Absolutely. Anthony, let's transition into our last section here. We've got about 7 minutes. When we're thinking about Power Apps teams together for process automation, we've talked about general scenarios, we've talked about bots and the relationship to custom apps in that space. Let's talk about this process automation, RPA, inside the context of Teams.
Right. And I think it's the current situation where the platform is today. Microsoft is doing a great job of providing tools. It's low code, no code. There's Power Automate with Flow, there's the Power Apps, there's Teams, all these different things that you're going to be able to combine together to really make a holistic solution. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a tablet/PC version of the app, and then you're seeing in the mobile version of the app. So there's two different ways that you can kind of view and work with that information. That's one piece to it. But when you look at adoption and people actually using these apps and how they're going to be able to find this and make this part of their everyday solution, just like you mentioned earlier, when you're looking at an executive team or any other team, you're going to need to make that accessible in some way. So what we see here is that there's an accounting app that's looking at these invoices that needs review. You can see here on the left, and it's accounts payable that's going to be taking care of these invoice pieces here, where you're going to be able to click on that little edit icon there, and it's going to dive into the details there. You're going to be able to either approve or reject that type of thing. you're going to be able to work through whether it's going to be adding it in for a discussion within Teams. So just really being able to round robin this. It's not like you mentioned earlier where it's this app that's out there and it's part of this other solution. It feels and looks like it's a part of Teams, like it was built in Teams. In which this case it could have been, but we actually used, Microsoft's one of their apps that they actually had out there to provide to people to use. We took advantage of some of those components and actually used that in our solution here. So it's been really great to see, where the Power Platform teams and the Microsoft teams are really colliding and working together to make something like this, really accessible and possible in the low code, no code solutions.
Yeah, I like how you've taken it, full circle here, where the accounting team has content they're working on, a lot of the generic things we talked about earlier about meetings and collaboration and chats and files, and then placed this custom app experience inside of that same space. And then even have integrated the idea, and this is right in the app, the idea of, the scorecard tied to the processes that they're accelerating.
Exactly. Yep, and being able to just see that at by a click, it just makes it so much easier that you don't have to leave these areas to be able to walk through somebody a scenario. So if you were to add, just like Damon said, in the middle of a pandemic or something else that's going on where people are remote, you're not necessarily working, bumping elbows, this is going to be a spot where they can go to and they're going to understand the natural flow of things just by clicking around on these few tabs.
And so you can see the invoices attached right there, right? So It's all in the same space.
Yep. And just making it really accessible for them and making it easy for them to understand where these things live, where they can go to edit and where they can go to confirm. And then, on the back end, there's actually a Power Automate that's running to be able to, move some of that stuff into a chat and making that more of a digestible discussion so that if there is, a discrepancy between what they're seeing and what they thought they should have saw, or just working it out with a partner, that's something that's possible too.
Yeah, imagine the difference in like onboarding a new accounting employee into this, right? It's like, oh, you're new? Great. Plug you into the team. Here's the aspects of operating that accounts payable process. Yeah, you were gonna say something, David?
Well, what's interesting too about this is that when you look at the file management that you're looking at right now, this is the same UI that OneNote's using. So if they have used OneNote, let's say that there's an accountant that has used OneNote, they come in here and they're like, oh, I know how to use this. It's exactly the same. And so it's that sort of infusing of technology and UI into the same scenario. So it's nice.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, let's close this up by talking a little bit about security in the context of teams. A lot of the well-known situations that have existed in collaboration and communication, where people have had meeting bombings and getting access to things they shouldn't get access to and all this sort of scenario. People say, well, it's a misconfiguration of the platform, or they didn't really understand how to configure it. And yeah, I think in some contexts that's true. But I think one of the big differentiators in terms of what Teams brings to the table is the relationship to conditional access and strong governance that is imbued within the entire platform, not just within a meeting experience, but within the experience of accessing content, apps, and the sub-content that exists within those repositories. The idea that I may have a file that I've opened, I'm viewing that file, I'm looking at confidential information within that file, and then I try to share that information through a screen share with someone else, and they can't see it because it's rights protected. So the relationship between all these different components brings such a strong security profile to the way we think about teams. So think about that in the context of where you are, who you are, what you're allowed to access, what you're not allowed to access, multi-factor auth, health of the device, what content's healthy, what content you should access, and how Teams brings that all together with the entire Microsoft security paradigm. Anthony, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think just from a security standpoint and being from the productivity and collaboration space, security is the exact same that it's been since the early 2000s. In SharePoint, when you're storing that content in in teams and groups, it's that very familiar look and feel where you feel like like when you're working through it, you feel confident that you've done it the right way because it hasn't changed in so long. It's a great foundation and it's easy to understand.
Yeah, I think the blocking and tackling of storing files hasn't changed, but I think where the real innovation has come is the end-to-end security story between the user and their identity, the device and the health of the device that user is on, and the relationship of those things to what they should have access to or shouldn't have access to, whether they're a guest or they're an internal employee or they're some kind of external B2B relationship you have. That's where I think the Microsoft story brings so much strength to the table.
Great point.
Right.
Awesome. Well, we had a great time here talking about Teams as a platform. So much that you can do. It's just, as you start to go through this, you realize just how much there is in the Teams platform that we're taking advantage of, and how much that has enabled the way that we work with each other. So we would love to talk one-on-one to dive into any of these ideas, how you're using Teams, how you can establish a Teams Empower Platform Center of Excellence, what that Center of Excellence might look like, how you can drive your productivity out into the rest of the business and not have it be an IT thing, have it be a business thing. So let's talk one-on-one. Let's have a conversation. Let's drive into a workshop. Let's unlock these different ideas. And then our next webinar that's coming up in 2 weeks is harnessing the power of the Power Platform, driving conversations around using Power Apps, using Power BI to differentiate how your business users are enabling innovation within your business to drive new capabilities forward. Also read our blog on Smart Restart. And also today, we just posted a blog on bots. Are they working for you or are you working for them? That's, I think, a pretty interesting thing to go check out. So thank you for joining us on this webinar. We'll see you in 2 weeks and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nate.